In the 10th century, in the cold forested lands we now know as Ukraine, a woman rose as a figure time would not forget. Olga of Kiev, a queen with a temperament as sharp as a Viking sword, orchestrated one of history's most ingenious and, let's say, explosively creative revenges. She wasn't a woman who settled for sending an angry letter or muttering complaints at court. No, Olga decided that anyone who crossed her would pay dearly, and if necessary, with fire. Literally. This is the story of how a queen, some pigeons, and a master plan turned a personal tragedy into a lesson that history books still marvel at. But let's start at the beginning, because no epic revenge begins with fiery pigeons without proper context. Olga, born around 890, was no ordinary noblewoman. She was of Varangian descent, a daughter of those Scandinavians who navigated the rivers of Eastern Europe in their longships, trading furs and amber on good days and raiding villages on bad ones. The Varangians were a people of sailors and warriors, known for their boldness and ability to adapt to the harshest environments. Olga, likely raised in a world of fjords and axes, brought that blend of pragmatism and ferocity when she arrived in the Rus of Kiev, a nascent state trying to consolidate itself amidst a mosaic of Slavic, Varangian, and nomadic tribes. Her marriage to Igor, the Prince of Kiev, was not just a personal union but a strategic alliance that linked Viking blood with the ambitions of a fledgling kingdom. Igor was a man of action, a leader who inherited the throne from his predecessor, Rurik, and dreamed of expanding Kiev's power beyond its forests and rivers. The Rus of Kiev in those days was a place where politics were written in blood and steel. There were no modern bureaucracies or treaties signed in elegant halls. Power rested on the loyalty of tribes, the strength of armies, and a leader's ability to inspire fear or respect. Igor, like many princes of his time, maintained control by demanding tributes from neighboring tribes. These tributes were not just a source of wealth but a way to remind everyone who was in charge. Among those tribes were the Drevlians, a Slavic people living in the dense forests northwest of Kiev. The Drevlians were a proud group with their own traditions and leaders, and they didn't take kindly to Kiev's dominance. They were like those neighbors you never invite to the barbecue because you know they'll complain about the noise. Their capital, Iskorosten, was a wooden fortress surrounded by swamps and trees, a place that reflected their character, resilient but not exactly welcoming. In 945, Igor made the mistake that would set everything in motion. The Drevlians, already paying regular tribute, were growing tired of Kiev's demands. Igor, perhaps emboldened by years of success or simply in need of more resources to fund his campaigns, decided it was time to tighten the screws. With a retinue of warriors, he showed up in Iskorosten to demand a larger tribute. The chronicles don't say exactly how much he asked for, but it was enough for the Drevlians, led by their Prince Mal, to say, "Enough is enough." In a world where negotiations often ended in blood, the Drevlians chose the most drastic option. Instead of yielding, they decided Igor was the problem and eliminating him was the solution. According to the primary chronicle, written a century later by monks with a flair for drama, the Drevlians killed Igor in a particularly gruesome way. One account claims they tied him to 2 bent trees and let him be torn apart when the trees were released. It's the kind of death that would make even the toughest Vikings wince. Whatever the method, Igor was dead, and the Drevlians thought they had won the game.
The news of Igor's death hit Kiev like thunder on a clear night.
Olga, now a widow, found herself in a precarious position. Her son, Svyatoslav, was only 3 or 4 years old, too young to wield a sword or a crown. In a world where physical strength and masculine presence were synonymous with authority, a regent queen was hardly the ideal figure to hold a kingdom together. The nobles of Kiev, the boyars, likely whispered among themselves, wondering if Olga was up to the task. The Rus enemies, sensing weakness, might have seen this as an opportunity to strike. And the Drevlians, feeling on top of the world after their coup, decided it was time to push even further. In an act of arrogance that can only be described as political suicide, they sent a delegation of 20 of their most prominent men to Kiev with an offer that was more provocation than proposal. Olga should marry Prince Mal and, in the process, submit the Rus of Kiev to Drevlian rule. It was as if, after stealing your horse, they asked for the saddle too. Olga, however, was not one to be intimidated by such a brazen proposal. According to the primary chronicle, she received the emissaries with a calm that, in hindsight, should have made them suspicious. She invited them to court, offered them food and drink, and told them that, to honor their proposal, they would be carried to the palace with full honors the next day. The Drevlians, probably congratulating themselves on their cleverness, accepted without hesitation. One can imagine them toasting to their victory, oblivious to Olga's brewing plan. The next day, the emissaries were carried in a boat, as if they were high-ranking dignitaries, to the palace courtyard. But instead of a triumphant parade, they were thrown into a pit Olga had ordered dug overnight. As the Drevlians fell, confused and likely screaming, Olga leaned over the edge of the pit. With a voice that must have been as cold as a Russian winter, she asked if the honor she promised was to their liking. Then, without flinching, she ordered them buried alive. Yes, alive. It was the medieval equivalent of responding to an insult with a missile. The first phase of Olga's revenge was complete, and the Drevlians didn't even know the game had just begun. But Olga wasn't one to rest on a single blow. The Drevlians, still unaware of their first delegation's fate, were waiting for a response to their marriage proposal. Olga, with the cunning of a fox, sent a message saying she was considering the offer but needed to meet with the tribe's most important men to discuss details. The Drevlians, apparently lacking an advisor to say, "This smells like a trap," sent another delegation, this time composed of their most prominent nobles. Olga, true to her style, received them with apparent courtesy and invited them to relax in a bathhouse, a common place in Varangian and Slavic culture for rest and socializing. The Drevlians, probably thinking they were about to seal the deal, entered confidently. But Olga had no spa in mind. Once inside, she ordered the doors locked and the building set on fire. The nobles, trapped in what must have been an infernal sauna, had no escape. The second Drevlian delegation turned to ashes, and Olga, with 2 moves, had eliminated the tribe's most important men. It was as if she were playing chess while the Drevlians thought they were in a card game. At this point, one might think Olga had done enough to avenge Igor. She had dispatched 2 groups of emissaries with an efficiency that would make any military strategist blush. But Olga wasn't satisfied. Her revenge wasn't just personal. It was a message to the world. No one touches the Rus of Kiev and lives to tell the tale. So she decided to take the fight to the heart of Drevlian territory. With her young son Sviatoslav by her side as a symbol of the kingdom's continuity, and an army of loyal warriors, Olga marched on Iskorosten. The city, built of wood and surrounded by natural defenses like swamps and forests, was not an easy target. A prolonged siege would have been costly, and Olga wasn't one to waste resources. Besides, the Drevlians, now entrenched, probably thought they could hold out until Olga grew tired and left. Big mistake. Olga, in a move that seemed almost conciliatory, sent a message to the Drevlians. She said she wanted no more blood, that Igor's death had been avenged with the 2 delegations, and that she was willing to make peace. All she asked for was a symbolic tribute, 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from every household in Iskorosten. The Drevlians, likely exhausted and fearful after months of tension, probably saw this as an easy way out. Gathering birds didn't sound like a steep demand, especially compared to the usual tributes of gold, furs, or slaves. So, with a mix of relief and suspicion, they collected the birds and delivered them to Olga. It was a moment when they must have felt like they'd dodged an axe. But, as in any good tragedy, the axe always falls. Here's where Olga's story reaches its most legendary point. The queen took the pigeons and sparrows, likely thousands of them, and ordered her soldiers to tie small pieces of sulfur wrapped in cloth to each bird's legs. Sulfur, a flammable material known since antiquity, wasn't easy to come by in large quantities in 10th century Rus, but Olga, with her usual foresight, must have procured it beforehand, perhaps from Byzantine traders or natural deposits in the region. Her soldiers, probably exchanging glances and wondering if the queen had lost her mind, worked through the night to prepare the birds. Picture the scene. Hundreds of warriors, accustomed to wielding swords and shields, now trying to tie bits of cloth to flapping birds. It wasn't the kind of task taught in Varangian military training. At dusk, the soldiers lit the sulfur pieces, which began to burn with a slow but steady flame. Then they released the birds. The pigeons and sparrows, following their natural instinct, flew back to their nests in Iskorosten. The nests, made of dry twigs and straw, were like tiny bombs waiting for a spark. When the birds arrived, the wooden roofs, granaries, and stables began to burn. The fire spread quickly, fueled by dry wood and strong regional winds. Iskorosten, a city that had withstood sieges and attacks, was unprepared for such an unusual invasion. The Drevlians, caught in the chaos, tried to put out the flames, but it was like trying to douse a volcano with a bucket of water. The city became an inferno, and the survivors, desperate, had to choose between surrender or flight. Olga, likely watching the glow of the fire from a nearby hill, probably felt a satisfaction that needed no words. Her plan, which on paper sounded like the idea of a madwoman, had worked perfectly. The primary chronicle recounts that, after the fire, Olga allowed some Drevlians to survive, but only to subjugate them as tributaries of Kiev. Others were enslaved, and Iskorosten became a smoldering reminder of what happened when someone defied the queen. Olga's revenge was not just an act of personal justice, but a demonstration of power that solidified the Rus of Kiev as a force to be reckoned with. With the Drevlians defeated, Olga ensured her kingdom's stability during Sviatoslav's minority, proving she was far more than a grieving widow. Now, let's pause to consider the logistics of this plan, because burning a city with pigeons isn't something you improvise over a weekend. First, Olga had to convince her army that catching thousands of birds was a viable military strategy. Imagine a Varangian general, with a braided beard and an axe the size of a table, being told to put down the sword and start hunting pigeons. It couldn't have been an easy conversation. Then there was the issue of sulfur. In the 10th century, sulfur was a valuable resource, used in medicine, rituals, and occasionally in warfare. Acquiring enough to equip thousands of birds required contacts, planning, and likely a fair amount of bartering with traders from the Byzantine Empire or the Caucasus. Once the sulfur was obtained, someone had to cut it into small pieces, wrap it in cloth, and tie it to the bird's legs without turning the process into a chaos of feathers and pecks. And finally, the sulfur had to be lit at just the right moment, the birds released, and the hope maintained that they'd fly to Iskorosten and not, say, back to Olga's camp. It was a plan that required almost surgical precision, and the fact that it worked speaks volumes about Olga's ability to lead and delegate. The story of the fiery pigeons is undoubtedly the highlight of Olga's revenge, but her life as a ruler offers much more than this spectacular episode. After defeating the Drevlians, Olga dedicated herself to strengthening the Rus of Kiev. One of her most significant reforms was restructuring the tribute system. Instead of sending tax collectors like Igor, who traveled from tribe to tribe demanding payments, and, as we saw, risking being torn in two, Olga established administrative centers called pogosts. These were fixed points where tribes delivered their tributes, reducing the need for dangerous expeditions and making the process more efficient. It also helped centralize power, making Kiev the economic and political heart of the region. It's the kind of reform that doesn't sound as thrilling as burning a city with birds, but it had a lasting impact on the kingdom's stability. Beyond her internal reforms, Olga proved herself a top-tier diplomat. In 957, she traveled to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, in a journey that was both political and personal. Constantinople, at the time, was the center of the civilized world, a city of golden domes, bustling markets, and a court where intrigue was as common as bread. Olga arrived with an entourage that included merchants, nobles, and likely a good number of guards to remind everyone she wasn't just a tourist. Byzantine chronicles, which rarely paid much attention to the barbarian leaders of the north, describe Olga as an imposing figure, someone who negotiated as an equal with Emperor Constantine VII. It said the emperor was so impressed that he even considered proposing marriage, though Olga, with her usual cunning, sidestepped it with a move worthy of a grandmaster. During her visit, she was baptized as a Christian, taking the name Helena in honor of Constantine the Great's mother. But in a brilliant twist, she made the emperor her baptismal godfather, which, under church rules, made her his spiritual daughter and rendered any marriage proposal impossible. It was the medieval equivalent of saying, "Sorry, you're like a father to me." Olga's conversion to Christianity was a pivotal moment, not just for her but for the history of the Rus of Kiev. In the 10th century, the Rus was a mosaic of pagan beliefs, with gods like Purin, the Lord of Thunder, at the center of the pantheon. Christianity, though present in some circles due to Byzantine contacts, was still a rarity. Olga's decision to convert was not just an act of faith. It was a strategic move that opened doors to trade and political alliances with the Byzantine Empire, a superpower of the time. However, her conversion didn't immediately transform the Rus, which remained largely pagan during her reign. It was her grandson, Vladimir the Great, inspired by Olga's example, who officially converted the Rus to Christianity in 988, baptizing his people in the Dnieper River. Olga, with her baptism, planted the seed for a transformation that would change the course of Eastern European history. Olga's life after Constantinople was marked by her role as regent and mother. Though Sviatoslav grew up and eventually took the throne, Olga remained an influential figure, advising him on matters of state. Sviatoslav, a born warrior, preferred spending his time on military campaigns, leaving Olga in charge of internal affairs. It was a division of labor that worked well. Sviatoslav conquered territories, and Olga ensured the kingdom didn't crumble while he was away. Their relationship wasn't always easy. Sviatoslav, a staunch pagan, resisted Olga's attempts to convert him to Christianity. But even in their differences, there was mutual respect, an understanding that both were working toward the same goal, making the Rus of Kiev a kingdom that could rival the great powers of its time. When Olga died, around 969, she left a legacy that went beyond fiery pigeons. Her regency had transformed the Rus of Kiev from a fragile state on the brink of collapse after Igor's death into a regional power with a stronger administrative system and ties to the Byzantine world. Her canonization as Saint Olga, or equal to the apostles, was a recognition not only of her faith but of her role as a nation's founder. The Orthodox Church venerates her as a figure who brought the light of Christianity to a pagan people. But even without the religious halo, Olga is a fascinating figure. She was a woman who navigated a brutal world with a mix of cunning, courage, and a touch of theatricality that makes her unforgettable. The story of the fiery pigeons, though the most famous episode of her life, is just one part of Olga's saga. It's easy to get caught up in the image of a city burning because of birds, but Olga's true greatness lies in her ability to govern, reform, and, when necessary, destroy. The Drevlians weren't the only ones who underestimated her. History is full of examples of women seen as just wives or mothers, only to prove they were much more. Olga didn't just avenge her husband. She ensured the Rus of Kiev survived and thrived in a time of crisis. And she did it with a style that, even 1,000 years later, makes us smile. Some might question the veracity of the Pigeon story. The primary chronicle, written by monks with a penchant for drama, isn't exactly a journalistic report. It's possible the episode was exaggerated, that the pigeons were a metaphor or a later addition to make the story more memorable. But even if the details are dubious, the core of the story is undeniable. Olga was a leader who didn't bend, a strategist who used wit as much as strength. The fiery pigeons, real or not, are a symbol of her ability to think outside the box, to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. Olga's life offers a window into the 10th century, a world where survival depended on cunning, loyalty was fragile, and kingdoms were built with blood and fire. In that context, Olga didn't just survive, she thrived. Her revenge against the Drevlians was not just an act of personal justice but a declaration that the Rus of Kiev would not be intimidated. And her legacy, from administrative reforms to her conversion to Christianity, helped shape a nation that would influence Eastern European history for centuries. So the next time you see a pigeon in a city square, remember Olga of Kiev. Because if she were around, That pigeon might be much more than just a bird.